Hey everyone, good morning, uh, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. So we really appreciate you for joining us. Rajat, if you could be able to kickstart, then I'll go ahead and introduce our guest speakers.
Sure, sure. Yes. Thanks everyone for joining. I'm Rajesh Shukla, co-founder at AppEQ.ai. We help customer success and account management teams by bringing them real-time customer insights at their fingertips. Today's topic is really on top of what we are working on, and we see a huge value of how customers are able to grow their revenue by one is that the growth with your existing customers is the easiest way to reduce your customer acquisition cost. And we have been working with customers who are able to increase their NRR by 5 to 7% by having the right practices and the right objectives for their team. So today's topic, would love to hear what Sandy and Mary can share around this topic of upsell and cross sell. And really excited to hear all of you. Also, a request from everyone: please do join us on video. Share your questions, as Sandy was mentioning, on the chat, or raise your hands, and we'll channel it to Mary and Sandy. Yes, over to you, Vincent.
All right, thanks, Rajat. Thanks for that. All right, just a context about the webinar. As we know, existing clients, we can consider that as a gold mine, especially for a B2B SaaS companies. However, as the business grow and the customers adopted more of the solutions, the focus shifts now is to expand the customer accounts. Now that raises questions about what kind of strategy should the business develop in order for them to cater for that existing customers. How should this strategy be shared across teams like AE, RM, and customer success? Now for this webinar, thanks Mary and thanks Annie for joining us. If you could be able to quickly introduce yourself, then we'll start with the webinar.
So who do you want us to go first?
Sally, you can go first, then Mary.
Okay. Sorry, I was sneaking a peek at the questions on the chat, so sorry about that. Hi everybody, I'm Sandy Yu. I'm so happy to have you here. I think upselling and cross-selling is such an important conversation for revenue retention and growth. So what I do is I help companies with revenue retention, looking at it from the perspective of NRR, customer lifetime value, and growing not just your customer base, but really focus on the business outcome of revenue retention and growth. I work with companies of all stages, but focus mostly on B2B SaaS that are in hyper-growth mode. So happy to be here and kind of share my experience from 20 years in big tech, and also my experience in working with hyper-growth companies. Mary?
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Sandy. I'm so excited to get a chance to do a webinar with you. We have been, in the same circles as many of you. Your names look really familiar over the past, I'll say couple decades of being in B2B SaaS mainly, but in tech. So it's really good to see all of you on the call today. I have, by the way, the Northern Lights in the background because I was sharing with Sandy, I'm on our family farm, and you probably don't want to see all the tractors and field behind me. It's kind of exciting. So if you want to chat about that after the webinar, let me know. Fill you in on that. But I've spent the majority of my career focused on building customer experiences for B2B SaaS companies and seen a lot of things that work and don't work related to cross-sell and upsell of solutions. What's the right timing? What are the right services to upsell? When do you charge customers for things and when don't you? And these are all things, that I'm sure Sandy can speak to as well, that we've, experienced the hard way. And so look forward to your questions today and look forward to jumping in.
All right, thanks, Mary. Thanks, Annie. Really appreciate that. All right, to kick this off, the webinar, I know most of attendees would like to know what are different ways and how we could be able to expand our existing customer user base. Now, if we're going to integrate upselling and then cross-selling strategies into in our go-to-market strategy, how can we do that without being seen as aggressively pushing that to the customer? And then how can we do that in the right way? If you could take that, Mary, then Sandy.
Yeah, perfect. I actually noticed there were a few different questions that posed exactly this in the chat. And I think somebody used the word sleazy. So
Yes.
definitely we don't want to come across sleazy to our customers. So what I have found is customers are really looking for you as a partner to come to the table with the things that are going to add value. You know their business, you know what they're trying to accomplish in terms of business outcomes. And there's a big difference between setting, a call with a customer to do a demo of a new product or capability than to set a call with a customer and talk about use cases, best practices, business outcomes tied to a new feature, new product, right? So a lot of it is the positioning and the mindset, the communication with the customer in terms of why you're meeting with them. So if you come in looking at ways that you can add additional value and position the product in light of how they can get value, that is a key way to open the door to a conversation that feels much more like a partnership. The other thing is that there should be some metrics that you're leveraging to see when customers are really ready for an upsell or a cross-sell opportunity. Consumption of licenses is one that's an easy one. But what are some of the other things that you can be measuring to show that your customers are getting value? So if they achieve 80% adoption of your solution post-implementation, within 3 months, what does that mean? Does that mean they're ready for a new feature or a new product in the sequence? So those are the things that I encourage you to unlock, is some of those metrics around adoption, when you can go in with best practices and really talk to the customer about how you can bring some additional value. Sandy, what do you think?
Yeah, those are really, really great points. And I think what you're alluding to, I want to separate the two things. The first one, I will just follow up on, I'll just add to what you're saying about when is the right time to do upsells and cross-sells. In addition to the data points that you have, I think it's important to have more self-awareness as a company, as a product. How do you know? You have to decide when is it valuable, aside from just utilization and consumption. When is it valuable for the customer actually to do more, actually uptake this capability or uptake this brand new product? So you have to understand the value that you're providing and what's in it for the customer when they upsell and cross-sell. And you can't do that in the vacuum in the experience or success organization. You really have to work with your cross-functional teams. You can start with product, right? So you work with product to say, okay, well, what does the mature customer look like? So you actually have to have a benchmark internally first before you can actually share that benchmark with a customer. So I encourage you to actually work with product to determine what does product maturity, user maturity looks like when your company. And when they reach that maturity, what is the vision you have for your customer to be even more successful by using this additional product, using this additional feature, or expanding? So for example, when I worked at WebEx, they had the regular meeting, but they also had a webinar product. So that's an example of an upsell and also a cross-sell, because it's two different products. And so the way that we saw is that when a company is mature in using the regular meeting platform for larger meetings, there are things that they don't have in terms of registration control, in terms of having the ability to have all the attendees be muted the entire time. So there are capabilities that our customers need when they're doing larger conversation or larger meetings. So it's valuable to the customer to have these capabilities that are available in our webinar product. And that's when you go in and talk about it. because you've noticed, you understood what the customers are trying to do. And you obviously talked to them. It's like, why are you having all these larger meetings? Did you even know what are some of the things that you wish that were in your current platform, the meeting platform? And did you know that that was available? So, you know, a lot of people worry about being sleazy. Like, it's sleazy when you're trying to push, right? When you're trying to get people to do something that they don't necessarily want to do. It's like the, you know, the used car sales guy, sorry, used car sales guy. But, you know, like, hey, I can give you this deal if you buy it right now. Like, no, right? We're here to help our customers be successful. So you can feel confident that you know them so well that you know that they are in the WebEx experience, they're using, you know, they're having like big meetings. They must be having trouble kind of managing the conversations and the registration and, you know, the ability to put radios. This is back 10 years ago when WebEx was newer. So that's the thing. That's how, when you can identify the opportunity, when there's a need of your customer. And it's a fine line between exploring and pushing. When you're asking a customer what their requirements are, that's not pushing. Like, you're curious, you want to better know them so you can see how else you can help them with the current product or maybe something else that you have. So it's a little bit of a nuance. And one other thing is that I feel like the CSM teams really need to be enabled. They need to have training on how to do this. That nuance isn't obvious, right? So they need to be trained on how to do that. So that's the piece on cross and upsell. So before I move on to the other piece, any questions around that? Okay.
I would just piggyback really quickly that you just sparked that there is a potential for a sequenced component to the upsell or cross-sell as well. So customers kind of change management and internal readiness needs to be taken into consideration. So the end state might be that this new product is really going to help them get to a great place beyond where they are. But is there a way that you can position it and support them in rolling it out in a manner that, you know, they can evolve to get to the kind of the pinnacle of the value? Because rather than do the all or nothing, which is going to be a harder upsell when they're not ready for it, is there a way that you can break it up based on what you know about them and their business?
Yeah, and then go back to your sales team, go back to your product team to say, hey, you know, the way that our customers want to consume our new products and capabilities is actually not all in one. You know, it's really by piece. And the product team and the sales team are really looking to you as a CSM, you know, to provide that feedback. So you have all this power, so use it for good. Tatiana, you have a question. Go ahead.
I do. I know perhaps I've been lucky enough, but I feel like a lot of CSM teams I work with, they do have that customer centricity. They do want to do the discovery and truly understand the needs and the pain points. Unfortunately, I think, though, in the last 12 months, as we all know, there's been such an increased pressure from the top down to drive revenue or squeeze revenue out of existing customers. And I know you're shaking your head, right? I'm right there with you, but I've seen it firsthand where it's like you have to produce it out of like no pipeline available, no opportunities available, but you got to produce the number, right? Or else kind of thing. How do you how do you balance it, right? Like being able to be consultative, right, in your approach working with customers and advising on what's the right thing for them, while having your like VP or CRO breathing down your neck saying, well, like, when is this customer going to upsell? Like, how much are you going to produce in the next 30 days?
Mary,
and it's a newish, you know, for those CSMs who are newer in the field, right? They may not have been through earlier recessions or earlier downturns where, you know, money was not cheap. And so it's maybe the first time they experience it, like, oh, like I'm stuck between the, you know, the rock and the hard place.
Yeah, Tatiana, it's such a great question. I think we've all been there too with our companies. Like, how do we know the use cases of our of our product and the business problems we're trying to solve. But now in this environment, we're being asked to, to your point, either push customers to buy stuff they don't need, or is there an opportunity for us to rethink about the value proposition of our product? So during COVID, for example, at Glint, now part of Microsoft, Viva, we had to shift with customers who were focused on supporting remote employees, and their strategy, that went from sort of D&I and overall employee engagement became really laser focused on getting employee voice during times of not being connected in an office, right? And that was such a huge change for so many organizations. And so it was our opportunity as an organization, rather than to keep going and pushing customers to launch another engagement survey and do this, we really had to pivot and create use cases and some features even to better support the organizational movement to being remote. And we were fortunate to be able to pivot, but it sparked for me that companies should always be thinking about, like, based on, outside factors and other things, what are other use cases your customers could be leveraging? Your product, for example, might be intended to get customer feedback or customer satisfaction feedback, but there's also an element of the company's employee productivity that you could bring to bear. So those customers with the highest satisfaction ratings, who are those employees driving that? And who are employees maybe that aren't driving as much satisfaction? So it can almost be a lever for insight into your employees, right? So the intent was one thing with your solution, but are there other things you could pivot to and help customers find value in? So that's one thing that jumps to mind that is in the control of the organization, is to try to think through new solutions to bring value and not just push, customers should just buy more licenses when they don't need them.
Yeah, I just love to add to that, Tatiana. I think depends on how big your book of business is, right? So some, enterprise CSMs only have 10. And for those that have a very small, so, you have to, I was just responding to Natasha. It's like, what is the training for CSMs? I think sales training, the appropriate type of sales training would be really helpful, because it's a mindset. So if you have a lot of clients, then you would probably take that time to actually get to know your customers, right? So you're still getting to know them, but if you only have 10, kind of large accounts, and you've spoken to your stakeholders and they're like, there's not an opportunity, it's your responsibility to actually expand beyond your primary key stakeholders, right? So upsell and cross-sell opportunities for enterprise companies, it's beyond the department that's using your service. So it's our responsibility to think about, well, who else could we help? Because the customer is not thinking about how your product can be used elsewhere, right? It's your responsibility to think like, oh, it's, your product is being used in the sales department, but what about product management department? Oh, do they don't do like webinars, or they don't do like meetings or one-on-one? This is back 10 years ago, right? Like, where can your product add value when you have like a small set of customers? Sometimes you feel discouraged, right? Because your key stakeholder already shut you down. You're like, there's no upsell. So then it's your responsibility to think like a salesperson, actually go beyond that stakeholder and broaden your approach. And I would also, one thing that we did when things were tight is actually think about what value can we bring to our customers. What you want to do when there's no opportunities right now, and this is more of a sales tactic, is actually try to increase the value that you deliver to provide. Do your customers want a cohort? Do you want to perhaps, set up opportunities for them to have community to talk about the challenges that they have? Do you want to start a user group? Or what we did at Oracle Marketing Applications, we actually decided to do a marketing maturity assessment for our clients who are using our marketing products. And so we invested in actually conducting an assessment of our clients when they weren't ready And then by doing that assessment, actually helped us understand their problems better. What are the other departments that are actually blocking the usage of our product? Like, you get to understand, think about it from perspective of what other value can we provide to our customers. And then very naturally, then they'll work with you. What you want to do when there's no opportunities is to stay top of mind. And staying top of mind is not just inviting them to webinars. It's actually helping them solve their problem. Although webinars are great. So just FYI.
Webinars are awesome. So I think there's a question from Justin about multi-threading and how we make sure that we multi-thread, early and often. And I was just going to share an example that I have seen work really, really well, which is during the sales cycle. The sales team's able to uncover the success criteria and really the business outcomes in a way that then gets transferred to the CSM and the post-sale team. The nice part is if you can reiterate for the customer at kickoff, right? These are the things that we are working toward together. And then every single meeting that you have with the customer following reiterates what we're trying to accomplish, where you started, and how far we've gotten. I call it a value review. So at least every quarter, there should be a value review. The executive sponsor, decision makers invited, and of course the project team. Now, the hard part is if the executive sponsor doesn't come, right, what do you do? And that's where you start to elicit, your executive's involvement to get the person in the room. And I'll talk about if that's not possible, what you do. But the value review is an opportunity to remind the customer that you're on a journey together, reiterate, so everyone's on the same page, what you're trying to accomplish, how far you've come. And now you have an opportunity to say, here's where we are in the journey, what's next? And so here's the opportunity. We could use some additional training, right? The managers aren't adopting like we thought. Let's focus on some additional training. Or it could uncover during the review, there is another product that will meet, your updated business outcomes. Let's take a look at what that looks like in the overall scheme of, right, the deployment or where we are in our journey. And so that ongoing cadence, letting them know that quarterly, the value reviews are going to happen, that it's an opportunity for the executive alignment and for the project team alignment so that everybody stays on track toward value. But those are great opportunities to mention what's coming on the roadmap, how it's going to help the customer. So that multi-threading in that use case is an opportunity for you to bring all the right people together on the customer side. And then internally, hopefully, depending on how you're structured, but you have the CSM and the account or renewals manager as part of collaboration in those value reviews. So I'm happy to talk about that further after the webinar if anyone's interested. But that is something I've seen work really well to multi-thread and keep the value conversation going. The other thing I would say is if your products are really complex and you've got multiple business lines. So at SAP, we had, my team was across 3 business lines. So the multi-threading there gets to be even more challenging because the stakeholders for each product were all different. So something that you could think about there is a relationship map, an account map, so that everyone has visibility and shares who are the key contacts and who's responsible for reaching out. And then, of course, an update, a status update that people enter into a system like a CSP or a CRM. But that's a lot. I'm sure we can make a whole webinar just, I think, on that topic. But
yeah,
is that
totally.
helpful, Justin?
Justin, did you have anything to add to what Mary has shared?
Yeah, no, that was great. I appreciate it. And I think, what we're also finding lots of now that we go back and look is when you're going through that upsell or cross-sell predominantly because you're going across different business units, that buying committee that maybe at the net new when you were bringing them on may have only consisted of 6 or 7 people. We're seeing it as high as 9 or 10 people because it's your existing stakeholders that are engaged. but it's also the new ones that maybe from a different business unit. So we sell the marketing, we sell the sales, we sell the operations. They're still involved, but they've actually brought their peers at those other parts of the business. So your multi-threading just grows, right? You have to be continuously kind of going high, wide, and deep across an organization. So thank you, Mary. Yeah, I appreciate the additional feedback there.
Good. One thing I would add is actively seek out naysayers. In large enterprises, they're often competing products. So different business units have their own budget. They get to, buy the product that they want to use, or they're an acquisition and they came in with another 2 years left in a particular product. And so there will be, in large enterprises, this is a big problem because they've already invested in that. And so that might push back when they start to adopt your product as well. So get to know the tech stack of the different business units if you can, because they may be different business unit from business unit. And that could be a competitive challenger for you when you're trying to do upsell. And what I started saying earlier is actively look for naysayers. Ask your stakeholders who's not here, who's choosing not to be in this conversation, because they're the people that are going to be going up to leadership like, well, this will never work, right? So what you want to do is try to incorporate as many naysayers and understand why, because they're not trying to be a naysayer because it's because they really felt like the solution they already have or the solution that they want to have is a better fit for what they want. So it's our responsibility to say, tell me more. What is the thing? What is the problem that this other solution you're looking at, or that you're currently using is solving? And what else would you wish that it could do? So I know it feels like case by case, but it's hard to have a silver bullet to say this is the thing that's going to do. But I think for me, I always try to actively look for the naysayers because they'll come up in the sales cycle, no doubt.
All right, I think Natasha has a question. She didn't raise her hand. Natasha?
Yes. Just along the lines of the value conversation, just wanted to kind of get Mary and Sandy's thoughts on the idea of once you get close or have established your ICP, taking your standard use cases and for each of those, defining those outcomes and metrics to measure those outcomes, and that way and templatize it, and that way it could be used to support the entire value lifecycle from value selling to value optimization, which essentially goes into expansion. Just want to see what your thoughts on that were.
So I'll jump in, Natasha. Thank you. I love that. Once you do, you're right. When you get your ICP really, really nailed down and well-defined and the use cases and the business problem that you're solving, there is an opportunity to templatize, even if you could have like 10 key outcomes. Sales is hopefully going in and leveraging the right ones at the right, prospect at the right time, and then ferreting out, like, are there additional use cases we're missing? But you're right in that everyone from all of go-to-market will be aligned to those kind of key use cases. So it's a consistent selling process. They're positioning things correctly. Marketing is getting the right ICP in the door. And then from a deployment perspective, everybody is aligned to what use cases work the best to solve these business problems. So in an ideal world, like, those things come together beautifully. And you're right, if you can templatize it and then share in all of the handoffs across and train and enable people on those use cases, you can bring value to customers even faster, right? The time to value. And then I would just add this, which is the use cases. I'm sure you're missing some, right? And so, because we don't want to get tunnel vision. So always making sure that you're listening to the CSMs and to the customers directly to gauge new use cases that you might be missing that you can incorporate.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, use cases that work today, may not add as much value in the next 6 months to a year as they did initially. So just kind of watching for, the evolution in those updates. But I think it's a great point. I think that's kind of that ideal state.
And then a follow-up, since you brought up time to value. So it's always, it's a very interesting, a little controversial topic about at what point can you really capture time to value, and can it be done within the implementation project itself, right? You've heard, various professional service, but by the way, I'm a professional services leader. That's where my background is. They talk about, no, it shouldn't be time to value. It should be time to launch, because once you get them launched quickly, then you could, set them up for, getting the time to value. But what do you think about the idea of capturing, value points in the actual delivery cycle, that you could actually say, okay, listen, because you're doing this is going to get you where you need to be. I'm just trying to figure out, is there a value metric that can be captured during the delivery cycle? I know that's that's very dependent on product and, the term, the duration of the project. But I just want to kind of get your thoughts on that to see, what you've seen out there, especially with the delivery teams and what they've done.
Yeah, I'll jump in, and then Sandy, feel free, and
Yes.
and anyone else as well. But I think, Natasha, what you touch on is I've also been in services and understand the time to value in so many cases is defined by the organization. So time to value is getting an environment stood up and users into the system. And I'm sorry if anyone thinks that is time to value. I don't. We could debate this. In fact, really quick story. I worked with a customer that defined time to value by having the environment set up and a certain use cases established, and the customer essentially live. And the organization made a goal that all customers should be live, or time to value should be less than 2 weeks. So if services got their customers up and running in less than 2 weeks, they got an accelerator. So guess what happened? Right? Like 100% of customers, new customers, were live in 2 weeks. Yay, everybody's patting themselves on the back. This is awesome. 12 months down the road, they churned a huge significant number of these customers that they had sold, because they weren't considering the actual value proposition in the customer's business, right? So they were using measures that were internal and focused really on just getting licenses sold and implemented. So I think, to your point, I do think there's time to value, which you could relabel as, time to customer, outcome, or something like that you can capture. What do we expect, 30 days after go live, or even 2 weeks after go live? Right? And it could be before go live with enablement. You could start to target, if you're rolling out licenses like in a phased approach, you could do something like that. I'd be happy to brainstorm with you. I do think there are things that could be positioned as time to value for services, and you could incentivize based on that. But so often it's all from the company lens.
Yeah, I'll definitely take you on that offer and follow up and have more discussion on that. But one thing that I was thinking of at my last company, we had it was a document management platform. We had an embedded workflow engine. And so if a project had multiple workflows that were in the scope to be implemented, you could take, early in the project cycle, with the project team, you could implement one workflow and, then show the customer what the time savings are for that workflow. And then if you have 10 more workflows that are in the scope, they can do the math in their head that, wow, this is going to be, a pretty substantial time savings for us once we get all these implemented. So that would just be like, little things, something like that we could probably show during the delivery cycle that ties to one of the outcomes related to driving down cost, improving productivity. But it's just going to depend on what the scope is and whether you could feasibly capture that and show that and produce those aha moments. for the
Yeah,
project.
Natasha, thank you so much for this great conversation. And I totally would agree with what Mary said. I think what's tripping a lot of teams up is that you feel like time to value is one thing. It doesn't have to be just one thing. It's not, to activation. It's not to value. It's actually both. So I think you can expand the definition of time to value to incorporate some kind of systematic or tactical implementation KPIs, but also kind of let the customer outcomes. And again, just like Mary said, don't look at it from your side out. You don't get to tell the customer when they have value, when they experience value. They have to tell you, but it's so important to capture what they say, because there's that scope creep, right? In professional services, there's a lot of that. And as more people come in, they will want different things. So it's important to get the customer's definition of value for this project, in addition to the timeline. And that I think that will be a good combination to say, what is that time to value? And have it clearly articulated from the customer's words, so that you don't get to the point of value and they're like, oh no, the bar's now moved, right? So I think, leading professional services, that's probably something you deal with all the time. But I think just expanding the definition will make it easier for everybody, because that tactical KPI of getting them up running, it is key. But like Justin says, you don't want the quality to drop. Right? You can't arbitrarily say that this client is going to be this, although you can look at maybe your past 10 implementations and say, for a customer of this size, this use case, what is the expected implementation time for up and running? So you can definitely use data-based approach to actually set up some of the templates you were talking about. I just noticed that. So thank you for that, Natasha. Cynthia, I think that's what you are going with, that it starts with building a success plan that with customers' desired outcomes. Did you want to add anything else to that, Cynthia?
No, I think, it's basically, we all know this, right? I mean, I think when we decide what a customer wants, and again, I think I've tied this back into the sales thing, right? Because I was on the sales side for a long time, and sometimes they'll launch something new and say, now go sell it to everybody, right? Go to whoever again. If you try to force feed a customer something like that, you will get absolutely nowhere. And you shouldn't. You should be punished with no sales. But if you go in with curiosity and like really understand, and you should be having those conversations anyway. You should really be understanding what their business is. And when it comes to things like onboarding, that just makes perfect sense. Like, why did you buy the solution? What are you trying to get? What does good look like to you, right? What's going to allow you to be at the end of the year that you've made the right investment. When you have those types of conversations from the onset, and then you both own that outcome that they say successful, equate to, then you can then measure it, implement something, and then come back with those wins. But it's never easy, right? There's no shortcuts. That's really what it is.
Unfortunately, no shortcuts.
Right. We also have another questions coming from Lakshmi.
Yes, hi. My question was around, I guess, distributing responsibility for upselling and cross-selling, right? Because I don't know that as a CSM, I am the only person who has the power to upsell and cross-sell effectively. And this comes from my previous experience of being a CSM in a remote team, whereas my product was working in a different location. And so I did not always have the kind of advantages that CSMs had who were working literally sitting next to the product team, who always had, an update on what's happening with the product and how can I use that information. The way that I imagine how I would have solved the situation if I were the leader in that company was, I could be responsible, but I would like joint responsibility with the sales. And I would be consulting product and marketing or whoever else I can get the information from to effectively upsell and cross-sell with the customers. And the reason why I say this is also because I don't think upsell should happen in a formal conversation. You identify the opportunities as you're talking to the customer on a day-to-day basis. and you understand what the emerging needs are. So I was just curious about how this happened with other companies, and how would you suggest that I solve the problem?
Mary, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, Lakshmi, thank you, because this is like the $1 million question is, who
Who
is
owns it?
responsible, right? I think the challenge is based on organizational structure and
Yeah.
incentivizing the upsell and the cross-sell, plus all the tools and capabilities and collaboration expectations, they all vary. But what I've seen work really successfully is that CS, being as close to the customer really as anyone else, more so I should say than anyone else, is in such a great place to identify the opportunity. Now,
Absolutely.
I think the CS qualified lead, I don't know if you guys have heard about that. The CSQL is something that can be, captured and stored in CRM, but essentially CS can be incentivized and rewarded for upsell opportunities, but not own a number and not own the actual commercial process. And so, once a lead is identified, then it's handed off to either sales or renewal team or account manager, who can go in and actually talk about, right, the product, do the demos, do the commercial conversation. The CSM knows the customer best and can inform the salesperson in terms of what business outcomes would be, the best to tie to this upsell, for example. So there's a good collaboration, but at the end of the day, when the customer upsells, the CSM actually gets, a bonus for that. And a lot of times it's quarterly. So there's a nice incentive to look for those opportunities. But the CSM, right, there isn't a quota to push on the customer to right, to be pushing them into selling. It's just when you identify the need. So I've seen that work effectively.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because my context was an early stage startup where the responsibilities were not quite defined on who's doing what in terms of sales versus renewals. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah, Mary, I have a follow-up on that, because that's something that I led at my last company, is developing a full process for CSQLs. Just everything from the point of, how we capture them, how they get created as opportunities in the system, collaborating with sales to determine who would own responsibility on close, on scoping. Would it be, the CS team? Would it be the sales team? And our sales team said that anything that anything that had attached ARR, with licenses, new product they wanted to handle, and everything else, they would just defer to the CS team to handle. And then also, making sure that we were building out reporting to track, so we can monitor those win close rates, and to establish that quarterly number of what we were contributing, to revenue. And then we also did the spiff. We had a reward commission program where for any bookings that involved ARR, they would get 2% of total bookings. Yeah. And 1% for non-recurring services.
Yeah, Natasha, that's a really great point. You have to see if your company has the comp structure, has the tools. I think when we hear about strategy, sometimes it's very tempting to just go and implement it, but there's actually a lot of infrastructure. Do we know who that is coming from?
Which one, Sandy?
Oh, there was actually some beeping sound just happened a couple of times. So just want to make sure to keep an eye on that. That's okay. So yeah, they don't want us to talk about this anymore, but I think just making sure that don't just try to implement something that you hear. Really look at whether you have the infrastructure to support CSQL submission, to support the payout of incentives, on a systematic basis. Do you have the sales operations people to actually do that? So the goal is really just have, instead of, you have to make sure don't say that everybody owns upsells. Okay. That I feel like that just doesn't work. You need to have one owner, but have that cross-functional alignment, as we've spoken before, to say, what are the parts? Who's going to play what parts? I think when you have more clear swim lanes and know the clear handoffs, if professional services hear of this opportunity, what is the level that they have to qualify to before handing off to a CSM? If a CSM hears about a potential opportunity for expansion, what are the questions that they need to qualify to get to the sales? So it's not very effective when you just go ahead and put in the lead or just send an email to the other team to hand off, right? So have really clear, well-documented qualifications and handoff processes. That way it makes actually the upsell and cross-sell opportunities more real. And the receiving team is not just like, oh, another thing I have to do, right? And then that just doesn't work. So definitely make sure that you have the systems in place and the process in place. It's a nuance, and it's hard when you're like 20 people, but however simple the process is, set it up now, because as you grow from 20 people to 40 people to 200 people, that's really going to serve you well.
You made a great point about qualification criteria. That's something that we didn't do, and we just had a bunch of junk leads that were entered into the system that didn't convert. But the other thing is, what we did is we also had an incentive on the CSM's bonus on number of CSQLs that were submitted on a quarterly basis. Is that how would you, is that a viable metric to incent the behavior you want? Because you don't want them to just enter whatever just to get their number, right? And I think the idea of having a qualification criteria was a great idea to try to mitigate against that. But what do you think, if this is included as a KPI on their bonus plan, their quarterly bonus plans, what do you think is what do you think is the right metric for that related to expansion opportunities?
I think as a leadership team, you need to look at the skill sets of the people that you're putting those metrics on. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of leaders said, well, let's just make the CSMs, create the CSQLs, but do they have the capabilities of learning how to have these conversations? Do they understand how to handle objections? Mm-hmm. And so you have to first look at the people, and maybe it's usually a mix, right? Usually some people have the skill sets, some don't. Mm-hmm. And also, how do they self-identify as their role, right? I think there's some CSMs feel are very revenue driven, right? They feel like that's, it's helpful to the customer, and they're very comfortable being tied to a revenue. There's also a lot of CSMs that are very uncomfortable. They feel like that's the antithesis of what it means to be a CSM. So you really have to, and the CSMs you hire in the beginning and as you have growth may be very different. So you have to make sure that people are in the right roles to implement a KPI like that. So it's nuanced, Natasha.
One other thing I would add is I think you're spot on in that really what you're wanting to do is drive behaviors that actually result in upsells, and right. I do think customer advocacy is a little bit overlooked, because customer advocacy is really the number one upsell opportunity out there, to have your customers talking about their value prop and getting others that they know engaged in your business. So incentivizing the CSMs around getting their customers involved in case studies, in contributing to the community, in being involved, potentially speaking at your own webinars, things like that can be a really nice metric to incentivize the upsell, instead of putting a specific CSQL number on them, for example. But I do think customer advocacy, if you're not measuring that or using that as a upsell mechanism today, is something definitely that you should consider.
I think it's telling us that we're almost out of time. Vincent, are there any questions that we haven't addressed? But +1 on the customer advocacy, absolutely.
Yeah,
Um,
last questions I'd like to ask between you and Mary. Then probably we can be able to close from there. Yeah. So as we discussed about upsells, cross sells, we're also looking about uh, the historical data coming from the customer. But at the same time, we would like also to ensure that we're also using the right technology to be able for our CSMs, our CS ops, to give more information down the line. What have you seen in terms of how would other B2B companies are trying to leverage technology to make sure that the cross sells and upsells are actually go in the right way, or help the CSM to be able for them to do the cross sells and upsells.
is your question, how should they use leverage technologies?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it really depends on how where you are in your company development, right? Like what systems you already have in place. We started talking about using CSQL, and you can actually built in flows for automated triggers. So is anybody else hearing that? No one else is hearing the beeping. Okay, it's my imagination. So I think what we need to do is really just look at what systems you have and what people will be interested in following, right? Because if you have a process and nobody follows, or you have a process that people don't actually have buy into, then I think any system you have that doesn't get used is not going to be very effective. Mary, you probably have a better answer than that.
In the last minute, what I would say is, we're collecting a lot of data on our customers. The best thing that you could do is start to leverage that data. So if there's an opportunity to pull together cross-functional data and start to run some insights analysis on, what works for the most successful customers versus those who've churned as a starting point, and look for some triggers in the data that say these things are different for a successful customer than a churned customer. That's a great starting point to be able to pinpoint where can you upsell, where could you do a better job with services, where could you, right? And really start to make improvements there. So AI is opening up a lot of doors to be able to do this. I would say data consolidation platforms and things. So that is something I would look into.
Great. Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Mary. Really appreciate your time for joining us, and also for all the participants for asking questions. So, Rajat, would you mind to close the webinar, and then we can go from there?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mary. Thanks, Sandy, for a wonderful session. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We will share the videos to your registered mail ID, and wish you all a great day ahead. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Thanks for all the questions. That was really fun conversation. Thanks, Mary and Vincent.
Thanks, Sandy. Thanks, Vincent. Thanks for chat.
All right.
Thanks,
So
everyone.
everybody, have a good rest of the day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.